Welcome everybody to Hort-Talk, an HTA podcast. This is episode 22 and I am Jennifer Pheasey, your host today. I'm joined by some special guests who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves. Baroness Fookes.
My name is Janet Fookes and I co-chair the all-party parliamentary group on gardening and horticulture. Rather a mouthful, so I usually just call it the parliamentary group.
Max.
Hello, I'm Max Wilson. I work with Janet to run the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group. And I also work with you, Jennifer, to operate the secretariat for the environmental horticulture group, which is the trade body representing the environmental horticulture industry.
Rebecca.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Grant from Joseph Rochford Gardens Limited. We are a wholesale garden nursery in Hertfordshire, serving the landscape sector. And my role is a horticultural development manager. I provide technical support to the rest of the senior management team, mostly in areas of sort of quality standards, environment legislation, among everything else. And I also run the Rochford International Rose Trials that we complete for rose breeders across the UK and Europe.
I'm David Lydiat, the Public Affairs and Policy Manager for the Horticultural Trades Association.
In this podcast, we're going to talk about plants, parliament and politics, so we couldn't have a better selection of guests. I'm going to start with Baroness Fookes. You are known for being the horticulture champion in Parliament. Where did your interest in flora and gardening begin, and how have your colleagues received your campaigns in the corridors of Westminster?
At a personal level, it was an interest in gardening and particularly in flowers and colours generally, because even as a small child, I adored colours. So it was unnatural to go towards a garden. But my real interest got fired when my mother said to me, I think it would be a good idea if you took over the garden and ran it for me, because we had quite a big garden, which I'm looking at right now. And from that moment on, the moment I was in charge, my mother knew her daughter. The moment I was in charge, I got really interested. And from that developed what I call the political interest. The group which I now co-chair actually started just as a sort of private interest group of people interested in gardening. But we soon realised that there was a whole lot more than our private interest, and that there was a whole, if you like, industry at stake which needed supporting and encouraging. So that's how it all came about.
Thank you. And could you tell us about first being elected to the House of Commons and your kind of early memories of being an MP in Parliament, and how do you think it compares to parliamentarians in 2024?
My outstanding memory is that there weren't many of us. I think it was around about 26 women out of 650 from all parties. So you can see what a big change there has been in my political lifetime. It certainly meant you stood out. But I suppose one of the biggest differences now is that so many women have got major roles in Parliament as ministers, shadow ministers, and of course we've had several women PMs, prime ministers, which was almost unheard of. I mean, Margaret Thatcher herself didn't think there would be a woman prime minister in her lifetime. So she was certainly wrong about that one. But I suppose the other great change has been the development of emails as opposed to writing letters and putting them in a letterbox, which has developed greatly because it's so much easier to press send than find a stamp and put it on an envelope and take it out somewhere to be posted. And one of the other developments akin to that, of course, is the social media, where I am not involved. I do not link in with any of the social media, but it can be quite an instrument of torture for MPs generally, and particularly women. Now, I didn't have any of that, so I would regard that as a really major change and not altogether for the better.
Thank you. And Max, if I may come to you, I mean, in your introduction, you just commented about the work that you do with the APPG and the the EHG, but you've got quite a long experience of working in politics. You've probably seen some changes in how we engage with politicians over that time. Perhaps you could share some of those observations with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I started working with Janet and yourself, my career began in politics. I worked for the Labour Party in opposition for a number of years. There's a unit called the Parliamentary Labour Party's Political Services Unit, and I worked on various campaigns out of there before going to work for Harriet Harman when she was interim leader of the Labour Party. So I've certainly worked in and around Westminster all my life, and including directly for the Labour Party. I think when I started off in politics, I think the obvious one is the social and digital media was much less sophisticated. I think that the nature of the campaigns that we worked on were very, very different as well. But it's interesting now seeing Labour come into government and the changes we've already seen over the last few weeks. I think it's almost a complete change of philosophy, really, with both my experience and Labour's experience being so opposition focused for so long, and now finally we're in Labour in government. And I think it's a different way of working to engage with Labour actually on the government side.
Any top tips for what the environmental horticulture sector should or could be doing? And perhaps you could make some comments about the environmental horticulture group and some of the work.
I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of detail around some of the policy, but I think that what I would say to any organisation in any sector that's looking to influence this Labour government is to not focus on yourselves and what you want to achieve, but actually think about what the Labour government wants to achieve and try and fold your own policy priorities into those. So one example would be around economic growth. Everybody knows that this Labour government is, in theory, focused on achieving economic growth. Whether their current policies in the budget are going to actually do that is a separate matter, but certainly their ambition is to achieve major economic growth. So I would suggest to anybody listening in the environmental horticulture sector, or anybody listening in working in a completely different sector, is to think about how your policy priorities can actually help the Labour government achieve that economic growth. That way, I think you're much more likely to get heard by the right people.
Thanks, Max. And perhaps you could just make a bit of a comment about the environmental horticulture group, because that group is really well placed to engage with government. Yeah,
very much. I think that the nature of the membership of the EHG means that we really span the whole of the environmental horticulture sector. And I think by having that knowledge base, having that expertise, having that frontline experience makes us much more likely to be heard and respected and understood by government ministers. I think that also we've been working on some new research, which we'll be releasing, I think, next week, which is very, very exciting, looking at the economic worth of the industry. And I think that the sheer breadth and the sheer value that our industry currently represents and could represent in the future, were we to work more collaboratively with government, means that I think government ministers in various departments need to engage with us, because we're such a vital sector for UK PLC.
Absolutely. And Rebecca, you work as a grower or for growers in one of those as the part of that vital sector. I was wondering if you could perhaps sort of, I guess, really talk to us about your observations of why it matters to work with politicians and get our voice heard with them, and really hear from your perspective on what it looks like as a business really implementing some of these regulations, engaging with politicians and getting your voice heard.
Yes, I think one of my great worries, and particularly with the new government coming in, is their lack of knowledge about our industry, and also I think a lack of awareness of how various measures or regulations they put in place will affect us and what the knock-on effects of those are. And I think we're, as an industry, Jennifer, very reliant on the HTA, who has in the last, in recent times become a lot more not more political, but more engaged within Parliament. and we feed into you. I feel we are feeding into you a lot more information about how we're affected on the ground, that helps you then in your conversations. And I think the more we can do as members of the industry to help that, the better. And certainly where we are in Hertfordshire, at work, we have a new Labour MP. He's a new MP, and new to government, obviously. And at home also, I've got a new MP. And I'm trying with both of those to engage with them, get them to the nursery, get them to just understand impacts of what, we've been working for a long time. We had our most recent OHAS, which is Ornamental Horticulture Assurance Scheme, audit yesterday, and actually it was our 20th year of being certified members of OHAS, which means for the last 20 years, we've been working really hard on things like traceability, biosecurity, and all the environmental requirements that it entails. And so we really do, as Max was just saying, feed into a lot of the government's aims and targets. But I think it's how we can express that in the right way that the government sees that, and sees that we really do help them, but they just need to help us a little bit too. But I think we're really benefiting from that impact that you guys at the HTA are having, and I can only commend it and try and help you more with it.
Thanks, Rebecca. We didn't ask you to say that. I feel
No,
like
you
we should-
didn't.
we should
I
put
know
that-
you didn't.
Absolutely, absolutely put that on the record. David, I mean, perhaps you could sort of expand on what some of those things we've been doing with members and as HTA have been over the last year. I mean, it's been a year of elections and a year of change, but it's also been one of progress, I think, in terms of some of our activities.
Yes, well, I think it all goes back to that wider piece of recognition and understanding within Parliament and indeed across the devolved assemblies in the UK, which we've been working very closely with this year. So I think Baroness Fookes was the driving force behind the Lord's Horticulture Committee and its subsequent report, which really looked in depth about our industry and what government should be doing, as there were several recommendations set out for the government, and which was released about a year ago, actually. Unfortunately, we didn't get much of a response that we were hoping for from the previous government. And I think we're very keen to ensure that those recommendations are kept in the mind's eye of the new government. Some of them are brought forward, and the work of the EHG and the HTA, and indeed their members in lobbying and building advocacy with their local members of Parliament and various ministers is vital to doing that. I should say that I work on behalf of the HTA Secretariat for the cross-party group in Holyrood, which is the equivalent to Baroness Fookes' group in Westminster, and Rachel Hamilton MSP is the convener. And we are doing very similar things of raising the awareness and the benefits of environmental horticulture. And that includes not just in terms of economic growth, but also in terms of things such as health and well-being and the benefits that gardening brings to that. But also on the education side, which is really important. So think about the next generation of workers, skilled workers, and sort of encouraging more land-based courses and learnings on the school curriculum and indeed in further education colleges. So the HTA are sort of behind a lot of that work and lobbying and working very hard to bring about an understanding of where environmental horticulture can work as a policy solution. It's not just us asking for X, Y, and Z. We're actually saying, look, consider environmental horticulture as a policy solution for urban developments in regards to greening, reducing air pollution, mitigating climate change, mitigating flooding, just to give one example there. And we're doing a lot of work encouraging our members, as I say, to speak out and meet and encourage visits to their businesses of various members of Parliament.
At the moment, the government's undertaking a curriculum review. There's a national planning policy framework, but all eyes feel like they're on the budget. So it's probably worth us exploring some of those policy areas in a bit more detail. But before we do that, I'd like to pick up on the House of Lords Horticulture Inquiry with Baroness Fookes, who you really were the driving force, and as Lord Reesdale described you, the real chair of the House of Lords Horticulture Inquiry. I was wondering if you could share a bit more about how you felt about that inquiry, what its legacy can be, and how we can all work together to really keep the profile of it alive with the new government.
It was, in fact, the third time I had tried to get such a committee going, because it came under a separate category from the permanent select committees, and it's one set up for a year with a specific role, and after that it folds and disappears. But I thought that was much better than nothing, given that, as far as I could see, horticulture, full stop, full scale, had never been the object of anybody's inquiries by the existing select committees. They'd come into it somewhere here, somewhere there, but I wanted the full thing, and that was what I got. And I hope that it did stir up both ministers and civil servants, because, of course, once the report is published and the various recommendations made, the government is bound to answer. However inadequate or well they may do so, they are required to answer. So you then have something solid on which to work. And this, of course, is exactly what happened. My anxiety was and always is that it's not a permanent committee, which is what I'd really like, but that was beyond my remit. But what I think is important is that reference is made to it. Now, I'm trying to do this myself. What I have started to do with the new government is to pick out particular recommendations which I like and ask the present government what their view is. So I'm not actually saying this is recommendation number 3, but that's in fact what it is, and then seeing how it differs or does not differ from the one given by a previous government. So I hope that that will be one way of keeping it alive. I mean, I have, for example, done one on the national strategy for horticulture, which effectively the previous government turned down. So I have asked one and got a written parliamentary answer. Not sure it's much more satisfactory than the previous government, but at least it is there, and I shall continue to do this on a regular basis throughout this coming session. But I think there are other ways which other people can do, which would keep it alive. And that is, if you are looking at things that as an industry you want the government to do, see if you can find a recommendation which aligns with that from the report, and then mention that in any conversations or whatever it is you're having, written evidence, whatever it may be, to say, this was a recommendation of the select committee. What is your view? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? What are you going to do about it? So you can keep it alive that way, and then it is a reminder that somebody had looked at this very thoroughly, and they will be judged by the answers they give compared with the previous government. So I think that's one suggestion that I make, up to the industry whether it follows that through. But I think that might be quite a useful way of keeping the report alive and kicking.
Could I just come in there? Is that all right, Jennifer? Thank you, Baroness Fookes. I think the report was the most amazing document that is kind of like a blueprint, really, for our whole industry. There was so much information in there. So many people spent time putting it together, and I think I've apologised to various of your committee members when I've seen them for the time that they have put in and for the lackadaisical response from the government at the time to the report. But I think it's absolutely imperative that that document almost just sits on the top of everyone's desk. And I think that's a really good suggestion, Baroness, that we think of things that are in there, the recommendations that are in there already, and that's what we put forward. Certainly, as I was saying earlier about connecting with my 2 new MPs, I've already sent them the document, and I intend to, when I meet with them, pick that up. So the work has been done. You know, we've got some answers of what needs to happen, and we're here to help that happen, but you need to help us. So I just think it was well, it's ridiculous to say that I was saddened by the response from the government, but I just think it was such a shame. And I think Labour have got a real opportunity to go, well, actually, the work's been done here. We can pick one of these up and give it back to the industry with a bit of support. They can get on with it. And then it ticks our boxes too. So I think it was an amazing, amazing piece of work that was done.
Rebecca, I think that you raised some interesting points there. And I think actually the most effective way of getting some of this to happen, I think, is a combination of what we've been discussing. So you were talking about 2 new local MPs. I'm sure many HTA members have also got new representatives, Labour for the first time. A lot of these new Labour MPs are, frankly, we're not expecting to get elected necessarily.
Exactly.
And so some of them will be, they're relatively new, relatively inexperienced. And actually, they're looking to understand a bit more about a new industry, a new sector, a new constituency sometimes. And I think that from my experience of working with Labour MPs over the years, is that the idea of them going to a local visit of their local garden centre, for example, I'm sure many of them would absolutely love to be able to see that on the front line. MPs love actually getting that first-hand experience. And I think that they can actually see for themselves what the sector is up against, the challenges it's facing on the front line. I think that's so much better than a meeting over a desk or some such. But if there are HTA members who can have those write to their new local MP, invite them to have a local visit, I think that's something that Labour MPs would love. But also, that is then an opportunity to talk about what individual HTA members, the challenges they face on a local level, but they can also bring in some of those national challenges that the whole sector faces, using the evidence base of the research that we're going to be releasing as an industry next week, but also bringing in some of those policy recommendations in the Lord's report that Janet was involved with, and that you've very helpfully pointed out, Rebecca, that if members can actually pinpoint the specific policy recommendations that are most aligned with individual members on a local level. And I think that's a quite neat way of tying everything together.
Yeah, I think, Max, what I would love to become is the person that my new local MP phones up when something lands on his desk that's horticultural based and he doesn't understand it. Go, I know somebody that can help me with this. And so I really want to become that person for him. And he came to our Big Rose event last September, met my managing director, and I've got a meeting with him booked in for early next year. He's going to come to the nursery. But I just want to be a friendly face that he can, because you say a lot of them are inexperienced or they're definitely unexperienced in horticulture. And here's a whole pool of people within HA membership who know horticulture and can really help them understand. So I think, yeah, I'm absolutely up for that. And I think the HDR are trying to encourage us to contact our MPs. Some people are reticent to do it. And I think we've got to get over the problem of this MP is a Labour MP or a Conservative MP, and inviting them in onto our property seems like we're supporting them. That's not what it's about. It's about these are the people who can influence things. Those are the people we need to be talking to.
Could I just come in here? May I just come in here? Because it's very important, this point. If you're the local member of parliament, if you're worth your salt, you won't worry about party politics when you're doing visits, talking to local people between elections, or even at elections too much. But go in as the local MP. I want to represent people. I want to know what you think. And then you can do it with all parties or none.
And the House of Lords Horticulture Inquiry was a great example of cross-party working, chaired by a Liberal Democrat Lord, with all parties represented, and it's really great to see. Max, I think you were going to come in.
I was, but Janet beat me to the punch. I was going to make the very same point about people not being afraid about the challenges facing the sector is not party political, and that actually, regardless of party, the industry has to work with their local representative, and also the issues that the industry faces isn't a party political matter. And when it comes to local planning reform, regardless of whether you've got a Tory MP or a Lib Dem MP or a Labour MP, with the government's planned reforms coming in, it's important that individual members engage with their local representative about what they want to see in those planning reforms, just as one example.
Is this a good time, if I may come in, just to say that all this is so crucial and really important for the reasons that my co-guests have sort of spoken about, and why the HTA have done so much in regards to lobbying efforts in the last 3 years in particular. So ahead of the election, we actually wrote a manifesto, an environmental horticulture manifesto, at the beginning of this year, which outlined 10 key recommendations for the next government. We were using that to lobby parliamentarians and different stakeholders we've met, and that is also in not just bringing them to HCA business members to visit the businesses and understand what we do, but also at events that we've held as well. We mentioned about the House of Lords dinner. We have a reception next week in Westminster. We recently held an event in Holyrood and have a reception in February. There we had the Plant in Parliament event with Ben Goldsborough hosting, who's one of those new Labour MPs that you're talking about. He's actually one of the rare ones who've got a bit of a horticulture background, having worked for the RHS for a while. He's coming with me tomorrow, actually, to visit to Viking Nursery in his constituency to find out these very real issues that we've been discussing, and that's why it's so important, so that you can build advocates and representatives in Parliament. So some of those issues at the moment, the big ticket issues that we've been campaigning on since the start of the year, have all been about the sort of border trade challenges that our members have been struggling with, being able to import, which is obviously something that the industry relies on quite heavily, for imports largely from the Netherlands and the rest of Europe, which have come under this new border target operating model regime. And to say it hasn't all run very smoothly is an understatement. We've seen a lot of plants being held up, being damaged, destroyed, far more administration, far more time costs, labour costs, and monetary costs for our members there. So it's building the awareness of that, which a member of Parliament may not know about, but would certainly have a direct impact in hopefully trying to resolve. And that's sort of the key points where we're trying to get across. And the other issue, major issue that we're trying to keep focus on, and has been at Parliament recently, was about peat and the peat ban, which is still up in the air, certainly in Westminster. And I refer listeners to a previous Hort-Talk podcast about the complexities of peat, which is really worth listening. And I won't repeat the arguments articulated there around that challenge of transitioning to peat-free. But we're talking, about support for our growers to be able to fully transition to peat-free from DEFRA, and also certainly a level playing field with our European counterparts who won't have a peat ban is absolutely essential there to have that level playing field. But since then, and since our manifesto, of course, the budget was unveiled by the new government, and that has brought up a lot of several new challenges. And there's been a lot of obviously press focus on how that's impacted agriculture and the farmers, but also our HCA members' businesses have been very much impacted. The HCA did some research very recently, which has calculated the cost to HCA members alone is 134 million, based on the rise in national insurance contributions and also the national living wage. So this is going to have a very real impact on our members. It's something we're going to speak to the government about, speak to members of Parliament about. But these are all great examples, or challenging examples, of why we need to do this, why it's important for HTA members to get engaged and to work with the HTA to lobby, and to hopefully to find some solutions to those challenges.
There's some huge issues that you've outlined there, and Rebecca, you mentioned that there is some reticence amongst the members, but also in terms of having not done this before. I just wondered if you can think of anything that we can do to break down the barriers to getting more businesses engaged with their local parliamentarians.
I mean, it's very easy for us all to see who our local MPs are. That's an easy one. Whether there's any way of you helping introduce members to their MPs, whether there would be a way of, so we have the Southern England WhatsApp group, which I am on, whether I should be putting something, say, on that I'm engaging with them. And actually, the MP that's coming in beginning of next year, I did wonder about inviting a local business along who's also in the industry. And then I thought, actually, that's probably not the right thing to do, because I've invited him to my nursery to visit me. I don't want to throw even more people at him. But I'm going out with my member engagement manager in the new year, and I do plan to talk to the members that we visit about the idea of getting your MP in. By that point, I'll have done both with an old Conservative MP and then the new MP, and talk to them about it face to face, which I hope will give them more encouragement to do so. And it's not easy. I'm backwards and forwards at the moment with my current one, just trying to find a date, and we've now finally got one. But it's not a quick process. But it would be really exciting to bring him onto the nursery and to show him what we're doing and what the issues are.
And as you say there, to share your experience with more HTA members. So
yeah, exactly.
Max, I'd like to ask your view on something. So whilst we've seen a huge number of new MPs, we've seen a Labour government return a significant majority, and actually quite a lot of continuity in terms of the shadow cabinet now becoming the government in place. What's your take on what that means for us? We are familiar with some of the DEFRA ministers. I just wondered what you think that might mean for us going forward.
Well, I think you're right to point out that continuity issue. I think that was largely true of all departments, certainly at the shadow cabinet level. Slightly a bit more moving around with the more junior ministerial positions. But certainly with our key contact, which is Daniel Zeichner, who is the minister in charge of our sector, we were fortunate enough that we had a very good relationship with him before the election. So when he was shadow DEFRA minister, we engaged with him. We had several. He came and spoke to the APPG. He came to a couple of events that we've been involved with. So certainly he understands the broad brush of the challenges we're facing. I think that, and he was open to hearing more about what needs to change in our sector, and certainly on the Lords report, for example, he was very aware of some of those policy objectives and open to working with us. I think that the challenge is that in opposition, it is easier to be sympathetic to some of those policy challenges than when you're in government and you're then directly responsible for taking them on. And every government has got to, has to listen to a million voices over a million different policy priorities, and it takes time for any of them to be brought forward. So I think there is the difference between opposition and government is in government you sort of you have to become computer says no a little bit, just because it takes so much longer for the wheels of the civil servant and government turn to get things moving. But I think that the environmental horticulture sector is in a very good position because we had that good relationship with Daniel Zeichner before he moved into government, and because we've got the evidence base of the Lords report, which Daniel Zeichner knew about before and knows about now, but also we've got some new economic modelling about the worth of the industry going forward. So I think that we're pushing an open door, I think, when it comes to Daniel Zeichner and DEFRA. And I think that the challenge for us is to take some of those policies forward, continue with that good relationship. But also I think that hearing about Rebecca's experience at a local level, I think it's so important that Rebecca continues that, but also that is duplicated across the whole country with other HTA members who are looking to engage with their local MP, so that there is this critical mass, if you like, of dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of local MPs understanding the challenges of the environmental horticulture sector, because then they are better informed to then challenge the minister on environmental horticulture sector, or even better, to challenge ministers in other departments that are relevant to what we're trying to achieve. So hopefully we're creating this environment where actually new MPs, ministers, and other political stakeholders are aware of the challenges they're facing the environmental horticulture sector and the policy objectives we want to take forward to actually meet those challenges.
So there's a huge amount of opportunity and excitement and energy from what we're hearing on this podcast. But David also did point out some of the challenges. He mentioned cross-border trade. He mentioned the transition to peat-free. And there's always opportunities in these, but they do come at a cost to industry. And of course, the most recent announcements around the budget impacts of autumn budget 2024. Rebecca, I was wondering if you could share your sort of, I guess, really top issues at the moment, a bit more detail about what that means. You clearly speak to many other HTA members. It's a difficult time.
It's a very difficult time, Jennifer, and I think we're all operating at with no fat. You know, since COVID, when there's quite a lot of business changes, we don't have any spare capacity anymore, and we're trying to navigate all the new regulations, rules, what we should be doing within those constraints. And the transition to peat-free, I think, is it's quite an easy one to discuss, because we as a nursery, we've been doing trials since about 2011 with peat reduced, and actually more earlier than that, but we're peat free as a production nursery, but we buy in from the continent plugs and liners, which are generally in peat. But we have certain crops that do not like peat free. Evergreen hedging is a very good example. We use several different mixes. We've tried different mixes. So we then end up loading feed into them. They go yellow. We can't sell them. So we've then got an area of the nursery which is unsaleable, which we're paying money to look after. It's costing us to look after them. We're putting extra inputs into it. We've paid more for the peat-free than the normal growing media the old growing media that we would have used. And it's sat there and we're not able to do anything with it. So it's a great challenge. The year after, last year, we actually put them back into a 50% peat mix, because we're here to sell plants. We're not here to have an experiment of whether they will grow or not. So that is a constant challenge. And we started off with peat-free as the plants will grow better in it. We'll do the things that will grow well in it. And then it's gone across the whole nursery. So the peat discussion is still massive. And I think for us, I have said this several times in meetings, that these exemptions the last government was talking about with the bringing in plugs and liners, just needs looking at really carefully, because we bring in anything from a tiny plug to a big liner, even a 9-centimetre pot that we will pot on for production. And if that is stopped because we can't bring them in peat, it's going to massively change how our business works, and not just our business, how many businesses work. So peat is a big thing. Imports, the lack of clarity is the major issue on what we're doing. We feel that we're less biosecure than we were, and yet we're paying a huge amount of money to be less biosecure than we were. And we're just constantly working through how we bring things in and whether it works and who will bring them. Hauliers who are starting to refuse to come to the UK, we're embarrassment, really. You know, on the continent, it's really a case of, will they still send us plants? So the entire industry is at risk. You know, there's massive areas, and then with the latest budget, the increased cost of employing people, somebody spoke a little earlier about training and education. Well, we need the very best staff out there to employ, that are trained and have the knowledge so that they can work well for us, which means, because we're not going to recruit people without experience anymore, because it costs so much to employ them, and if it doesn't work out, it's very difficult to change that. So it just becomes very, very difficult, and there's nothing, and we're doing so much that the government needs us to be doing to help the government, and we just need a little bit more help and acknowledgement of that. so that we can work together to make the industry viable within all the restraints of what we're trying to do and what the government wants us to do.
Something that gets talked about quite a lot is the fact that the sector has never received subsidies. It's not been a sector that has been supported, and naturally is a sector that's quite resilient and positive. It has to be. It can't control the weather. So we are quite a sort of, I would say, an optimistic sector. Sometimes at the moment it doesn't feel like the sector is feeling that optimistic. Certainly with what we're hearing in the news as well. I just sort of wondered if sort of any reflections on what kind of exciting innovations there might be coming up. Rebecca, you obviously are looking at how you're innovating and how you can do more and be more productive, I'm sure. I just wondered if you've got any thoughts on what's exciting you in terms of new things within the industry.
Well, we tried a very interesting project earlier in the year where we tried to use a drone to do our count our plants for us. So we obviously have to keep our stock numbers very accurate on the system so that we have the plants to sell to customers when they phone up to order them. And counting plants is a very expensive business when you've got to send people out there to actually count them. So we had drones flying through the polytunnels and across the beds. It didn't work, but it was a very exciting idea to try. I think it works if you start off with a pot with a tiny plant in it that can count the pots, but then as everything got bigger, it got a bit confused. But we're constantly looking at those innovations and running, the peat free it's a really interesting. Every year we will take about half a dozen different mixers and just try them in different plants, see how they grow, measure feed content, measure everything. And those are areas where we're just trying to get it right. The introduction of much thinner plastic for plant pots was brilliant, and it was an industry driven thing. We're doing all of these things ourselves because we know it's the right thing to do. And the change in colour of pots, all these things have been very good innovations that the industry has driven without really anyone wanting us to do it or saying we should do it, because we're an environmental industry, and we've always been very much at the front of what we should be doing in very efficient irrigation systems, sub-irrigation systems, boreholes, reservoirs and things like that has always been the right thing to do. That answers your question.
Thank you. Baroness Fookes, what do you think we can do to get more parliamentarians growing more things themselves and loving plants as much as you do?
I think we actually have a number of parliamentarians who do just that on a private basis. It's whether you can harness that private enthusiasm to work more vigorously for helping the industry as such. So that, I think, is the great trick. Hopefully, something like the reception that I'm hosting very shortly will help with that, because we are getting a number of people from both houses coming in as guests. Now, that is a wonderful opportunity for those who are there from the various parts of the horticulture industry to talk nicely to them and perhaps induce them to be more active in the political sense as opposed to the private interest. That seems to me one good opportunity for such a reception. And of course, it can also be done, as we have suggested earlier, that they are invited to nurseries, parks and gardens might be a good opportunity for getting in on the act, because after all, it's all plant-based. So I think one needs to perhaps be a little more imaginative in the various things you might ask a local MP to do in order to get them interested. Or if they are particularly keen on employment opportunities, there's a wonderful opportunity there to explain the kind of careers that are open to people and the variety of careers, which I think most people outside would not realise at all. So I think there are ample imaginative ways in which we can get them more interested.
I think we should have an ambition to have the leaders of all the parties planting trees somewhere within the next year. David, the HTA team has innovated in terms of taking plants into Parliament. wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how successful that's been.
Yeah, it might sound quite easy getting plants into Parliament, but logistically, trying to bring over 100 different plants into the parliamentary state is not easy in regards to security and getting them through the back door. But very pleased to say that HA have got a very good team who managed to do just that. We've done it for 2 years now, actually. We've invited politicians from both houses, Commons and Lords, to drop into one of the rooms in Portcullis House, whereby we had a number of giveaway house plants or office plants, as we were framing them, to go on their desks in Parliament with some HTA branding on there with some of the key information that we want them to take away. We actually did something similar in Holyrood, where we had a stand outside the debating chamber. So as all the MSPs came out, we managed to collar them, although we didn't really need to because we had such a beautiful display of flora from Stan Green's nursery at Grove, which attracted them, and then we could talk to them one-to-one for 5-10 minutes before their next meeting or next debate about the industry and how they can help and what the industry can do for them. So it's been very well received, I feel, and hopefully it's going to be an annual thing, an annual tradition. The HTA plants in Parliament for MPs to drop in and pick up a new office plant.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to ask you to pick either your favourite plant, your favourite politician, or one thing you would wish for us to do, or the new government to do for the industry. You can pick any of those, but perhaps Max, I could come to you first.
How cruel, Jennifer. I do have 2 very nice Acer trees, is that how you pronounce them, in my garden, and I'd say with the time of year, they're particularly beautiful at the moment with some bright yellows that are just on the verge of finishing shedding, so I'm going to go with those.
Fantastic. Baroness Fookes, you are an individual who has a fabulous new clematis named after yourself, but I wondered if you'd like to share your favourite plant, your favourite parliamentarian, or something you'd like to wish for in the future.
Oh my goodness, it's cruel to me as well, because I suppose it's always going to have to be a plant, but which to choose, because I'm not a one type person. You have the ones who go for chrysanthemums or whatever it is, and I like them all. But perhaps, since I'm having a clematis named after me, I could make that my favourite for the time being.
And I'm sure we can give a plug for where people can buy it. It's from an HGA member. Rebecca.
I'm going to be really naughty and do 2. So my plant is, and I saw one today, is a Calicarpa, which at this time of year has the most amazing small purple berries that look like they've been stuck on. And I think my desire for this government is that we can talk to them more and help them understand how we underpin so many of their ambitions, and that we can really work together to benefit both parties with the help of the HTA.
David.
Well, as I work for the HTA and we're non-partisan, I'll have to say my favourite politician is Baroness Fookes, who she's on our podcast. Favourite plant, it would probably have to be dahlia, because I was inspired by my nan's fantastic garden growing up, and she's had beautiful dahlias, which I've tried to replicate with mixed success of my own. And in regards to what the government could do, apart from perhaps looking again at the budget, I think an SPS plant health agreement with the EU, establishing that would go some way to helping HTA members in regards to imports.
Thank you. Thank you for all being such fantastic guests on our podcast today. This has been Hort-Talk episode 22. Take care.